Great to see everybody. Thanks for coming. This is an amazing event. As Saravana gave in the kind of history of this event, and I was looking back at this as well. This is the 7th year in various guises that we've had this event. And how many people were here last year? How many people were right? So most people. How many people are here back in 2012 though? How many people have been every year? Hardly anybody. So I was here in 2012 as well. It was at the Microsoft offices, I think, at Cardinal Place, which don't even exist anymore in Victoria. And it's just gone from strength to strength to strength. And it's all down to you. It's all down to the community around this, the amazing people who work in this integration space on our technology, which we appreciate every single day. So I'll just extend Saravana's welcome and just thanks to everybody for taking the time out for the next 3 days to come to this event. And I really hope you all enjoy it. So let's get started. So for those of you who don't know who I am, I've been in the integration space like a really long time. And for those of you who do know me, you already know that anyway. I was an MVP before joining Microsoft about three and a half years ago. MVP on kind of BizTalk Server and then Azure, and just always saying this integration space for like a decade. I think I was an MVP. It's been an amazing experience joining Microsoft and sort of seeing things from the inside and then sort of driving products. So I'm responsible for Logic Apps. You have a large number of the team here, and I'll kind of introduce people later on. But there's over 20 of us here this year. I think it's the most number of people that we've had at this event ever. So most of the front row here are kind of Microsoft people. So I'd encourage you to kind of meet people and talk about integration in the time that you have here for the next 3 days. So let's get started. So, I really want to talk about digital transformation, but I don't want to talk about it in those terms because I think they're really overdone. What I want to talk about is change. I want to talk about what drives change and what's really driving digital transformation, because these two things are really synonyms for one another. Change is really the one thing that doesn't change, right? Other than kind of death and taxes, you just have to assume in our industry that things are going to change. And the rate at which things are changing is only accelerating. We're in this continual state of flux. We just see more and more and more innovation. Since BizTalk 2000, nearly 20 years ago, you look at the amazing pace of innovation and change in the industry. And even kind of before that, and I'll come on to that in terms of my own history, but things just do not stay the same for very long. It's getting worse. The acceleration, the pace of change just doesn't abate. But it's up to you how you define what worse is, because your worse is somebody else's better, right? It's like if you feel like you're being disrupted, if you feel that change is being forced upon you, then you really need to sit back and think about that and how you can reverse that equation. Because you're always better off in the position of dictating change, driving your own industries, and making change happen in a positive way to get things done for the better. Because this is not going to change, right? See point number one, it's just going to keep going. So, my own personal history, and this is like, just dates myself immediately. Who sort of remembers this stuff? So I started off in the 80s, in the first period, I would say, of computer disruption, right? I mean, we talk about kind of digital transformation as this new thing, right? But it's been going on for a really long time. We talk about citizen integration. We talk about democratization of our industry. But this has been happening for a really long time. I remember vividly, back in the 80s, I got my first home computer. This is actually a Commodore Plus 4 over here. And I started writing games for this thing when I was at school. This is really the advent of the so-called bedroom programmer, right? The ability to actually have a computer in your home is not new. That was not invented with the internet. It was invented 20 years earlier than that. And there was a huge amount of innovation in this space. Everybody from Apple and Commodore and Sinclair and others kind of got into this space. Even people like Mattel, who are a toy manufacturer with their Aquarius, got into this space because a bit like how things are today, nobody knew where this was going to go. Nobody could predict the future and what was going to change with the advent of creating these home computers. So I kind of, had a bit of fun. Some people made a lot of money. I wasn't one of them. Just these are some of the games that I wrote. But what I thought was interesting is that this era. I think you sort of look back and it feels like it was a very short period of time. It was nearly 20 years. The first home computers came on the scene in the late 70s, and the Commodore 64 was probably one of the best-selling home computers that there was. Didn't cease manufacturing until 1994. That's the year before Windows 95, which is really Microsoft's huge consumer play. To get computers into the home, get PCs into the home, was nearly, this period was 20 years. So change kind of happens slowly over a period of time. Sometimes it feels like things are changing really quickly, and sometimes, it feels like they're moving much more slowly. So my first home computer was this thing here. Did anybody here have one of these? Anyone here as old as me? Beautiful. So I kind of spent my summer holidays when I was a kid, and I pored over the manual in the back of the manual that came with this thing, along with it was like 200 pages of how to switch this thing on and plug it into your TV. And then there were 2 pages at the back of all the opcodes for the 6502 processor. And I spent the summer holidays learning this stuff and actually learning machine language. And this was the cartridge you plugged into the back of this thing that lets you actually program in assembly language on this computer in the full 3.5K that this thing had. It was glorious. That was, the best part of maximum 2,000 instructions, because most opcodes were 2 bytes, right? So you filled this thing up pretty quickly. But things moved on, and we actually moved away from home computers in the 90s, and really gaming and consoles took over. Because at the same time, stuff like this, Windows 95 was driving computers into the home in a much broader way than it had happened in the past. Back when we had home computers, as I said, nobody knew what these things were for. People were buying them for their kids because they were kind of educational, and they ended up playing games on these things. And companies were springing up and creating word processors and databases and spreadsheets. And you could use the same thing for all of this stuff, but it pretty much sucked depending on which one that you chose. And really, the PC really kind of changed all of that by providing a platform for businesses to actually build on top of this stuff. The great thing about the 90s was that these things were moving so fast that they were pretty much redundant. So this is 4 of the computers that I had in the 90s. They lasted about a year and a half before it was just junk and you had to replace it for something faster. The big tower thing that looks really impressive was the 133 megahertz Pentium, the first one. I think it had 16 megabytes of RAM. So things have moved on a little bit in the last 20 years. The other thing that happened to me was that I started work. I started off working for the Southeastern Electricity Board in the UK. So this is the electricity provider for the Southeast. And they kind of gave me this choice. They said, well, we have these mainframes, and all the sort of intake of junior programmers is just bringing people on and teaching them COBOL and Kix and all of this stuff. And they're like, you could do this, or you could kind of get one of these things. It's we have a couple of these kicking around in the office. We're not really sure what to do with them. So I kind of went down the path of kind of doing the mainframe thing, and then kind of moved on to PCs later on. And what I started to do was actually sort of front end and screen scrape this stuff like many other people. To actually have this sort of hybrid integration architecture platform, right, spanning between different worlds, between this IBM world of these green screens and being able to drive that. Because really what we were trying to do and what Microsoft was trying to do was to make computers easier to use. This was hard stuff. It's to get people who had no familiarity with computers, they were only in the offices, using kind of 3270 terminals and things to actually get their job done, was a non-trivial problem. And you look at this now, and kids in school learn how to code, and they learn how to use Office and everything else from a very young age. It was not like that 20 years ago. So things moved on, right? We got Internet Explorer in the 90s. We got Visual Studio 97. This has had its 21st anniversary last year. And of course, BizTalk Server came along in 2000. Fantastic product. It's 10th release of this product and just has kept going strength to strength. The iPhone came along, which really changed a lot of this. I'll just keep moving on. And then where we are right now is this next wave of disruption. From cryptocurrencies to IoT to logic apps, of course, the invention of iPaaS, integration as a platform, all the way through to bot framework and other things, just the intelligence with Cortana, the ability to now talk to computers, which was science fiction 20 years ago, and now very much a reality. Of course, my seminal moment was joining Microsoft 3 years ago and actually working on these products themselves. And they say that, time, always drives positive progress, right? This is better. We move from one to the other, and we kind of move between these decades, and things just get better and better. And I really hope, that continues, because everybody likes better, right? One example I'll use, because I think it's a very interesting one, when you look at disruption, you look at digital transformation, you look at the amount of change that has occurred in industries over the last 10 years or so. One of the ones that seems really gone through significant change just in the last 5 years is banking. Banks started in a formal way in the 1300s. In Italy, the first banks were flickering. The first banks were created, and their objective is really around keeping physical assets secure. The problem was that people had money and they needed, and in many cases it was in some other asset form like gold, and they needed it protected, and that was the job of the bank to protect that money and to record it so that you could rely on going back and being able to take this money out and it was actually still there. You know, Wells Fargo, who are going through their own kind of transformation right now, is a picture of the sort of stagecoaches in the 1850s because they had the same problem. You know, 600 years later, that problem hadn't been solved in the US, where they're just trying to move money from A to B, using stagecoaches to do this 150 years ago. And things like, you know, wire transfers were really, you know, enabled through telegraphy, right? So there was no simple way of moving money around other than physically moving it from A to B. It's very branch-centric with ledgers in each branch, so the ability to even move money around in your own bank was much more difficult than it is today. But this all changed, obviously, with the advent of computers. And mainframes particularly, honestly. You know, the first ATM, the picture at the bottom here is of Barclays Bank in 1967, with the crowds just fascinated by this new ATM, the first one in the world. I mean, who wants to see a crowd like that, a queue like that at their local ATM, right? But things, you know, changed very quickly after that, and it was around banking efficiency, how to enable the bank to do more and to scale up, right? As a number of customers grew, they needed things like automated transfers, BACS for doing payments, SWIFT for automated transfers of money between banks. With the SWIFT network, created in 1973, you know. So, but like what happened since then? You know, we had the ability to like move money around between banks inside our bank like 40 years ago. And again, things slowed down. Right? We kind of went through this period, again, of very little growth or change in this industry, very little disruption until recently, until the internet came along and PCs got installed in everybody's homes and everyone started getting online. This is a much more balanced equation. There was something in it for the banks, sure. You know, you see the extinction of branches that's happening globally in terms of, you know, there's always one of these double-edged swords, right, where I enable people to do things online and then they visit their branches less and they just gradually die off. And the banks are obviously driving that because they're incented to do so, but it's actually about convenience for the customer as well. It's about that customer experience and improving that by providing more options for them to be able to do things with their money. It was the end of the bank manager, you know, as well. But, you know, where we're at right now is even greater disruption. The last few years have brought multiple initiatives to drive banking to the next level. Things like PSD2, which is driving APIs, banks opening themselves up to be able to build new platforms on top of these banking infrastructure APIs. Blockchain, of course, you know, is just changing what a bank actually means. I think I read recently that 50% of global banking customers have used a non-traditional banking service last year. Right? So that means they didn't go to a bank to move money around or change currency from one to another. They used peer-to-peer lending or some other mechanism online instead of using a traditional bank, a traditional lender to do that. 1 in 10 Americans actually switched bank accounts last year. So people are moving to where the technology is and where they get the most value out of this. And of course, you know, things like the cloud is like what you're going to hear a lot about in the next 3 days. So I kind of want to try to break this down. I think there's sort of 3 phases of disruption. There's probably more than this, but to sort of keep this short, there's 3 phases of disruption. I think the first one is really denial. In any industry, there's this period of very slow growth, very slow change. And everyone's comfortable with the way the company's doing, the organization, it's making money, it's all good. But you're really in this denial stage because you're not trying to anticipate what the next thing you can do is. You're not really trying to drive disruption yourselves. You're really just getting comfortable, right? And the next thing that typically happens is this sort of period of questioning. You can start to see changes arrive on the horizon. You sort of maybe get new people in your organization with new ideas. And that's what starts to drive the second phase of this, where it's like, why do we do things the way that we do them? Why has it always been done like this? You know, why it's like 50 years of doing it like this? Is there not a better way of doing it? And then you reach this stage of enlightenment, where you start actually trying to disrupt the way you do things. Often inside your organization, as I said earlier, it's like that's the best way to do this, and I'll talk a lot about this. Because the last thing you want is to wake up one day and realize you've been disrupted from the outside, right? Industries that have been heavily disrupted and caught people by surprise with the application of technology. Things like the hotel industry with Airbnb, or the transportation industry with companies like Tesla, or Uber or Lyft or whatever. I don't need to go into those examples. You're all super familiar with that. Because what usually happens is that innovation actually plateaus. So you go through this period of rapid innovation, rapid growth, rapid changes in the way things get done. And then an ecosystem kind of builds up around this. You get an established business. And a support network immediately grows around it. The technology matures. The people who know how to use that technology, leverage that technology, make it effective and make it work and make it predictable, honestly, right? So that you can implement at a predictable cost and a predictable risk. And it kind of plateaus. It just kind of levels off, right? Until the next sort of wave of change comes along, and then it kind of drives it up again. And so you go through that cycle again and it repeats. So it's not like it's some straight line or exponential. It's always this kind of lumpy thing that you look at any industry over time, you sort of see this. Oops. Here's a quote from a guy called Lewis Mumford. This is, I find this interesting because this guy was like 1946. He called himself not just a writer and historian and architect, but he's actually a technologist in 1946, before the first, at least commercial computers existed. And I'll just point out a few things in this. He talks about the fact about this innovation plateau kind of problem, that the continuities, the actual just evolution of something, very rarely drives progress forward in a non-linear way. You end up with inertia where things just slow down, the progress of change stops, and then you have to reach this period of mutating, which I just love this because only people in genetics and IT kind of use these words on a regular basis, or technologists in the 1940s. It's like you have to make a step change. Things have to change significantly to provide durability for the future, to build a new platform, to invent something new, which you can all move to continue that growth. Otherwise, it would have just flatlined years ago, right? Okay, I am not saying this is easy. This is, in fact, very hard, right? A lot of companies have tried creating innovation centers and centers for excellence on this and that, and just getting a group of smart people together in their organizations and trying to figure out what their company, what their industry should look like 5, 10 years from now. It's difficult, right? You can't just put people in a room and say, just come up with new stuff and make it impactful, right? That's actually pretty difficult. But the hard, cold facts are that it's estimated that 10 years from now, 40% of the Fortune 500 will no longer exist. And if you look back over the last 60 years, 88% of the Fortune 500 that existed in 1955 are gone. Only 12% of these world's largest companies, or at least America's largest companies, no longer exist, right? The odds are not good if you stay the same, if you continue to do things the way you've always done them. But you don't have a choice, right? Because if you don't disrupt, somebody will disrupt you. And this is honestly what digital transformation is all about. It's just a pretty marketing way of kind of dressing this up to make it sound exciting. It is exciting for sure, but it's also scary, right? But it's a problem that you've got, whether you like it or not, because change is coming. But here's the good news. We're all in this together. None of you, no industry, not even us as Microsoft, is immune to this. We're all being disrupted. We're all having to face the challenges of learning new technology on a daily basis. So many people, including, we hear this from our customers all the time, struggle to keep up with the pace of change of technology and the new services and things. We feel this too, even inside Microsoft. It's almost impossible to keep up with everything that we're doing. And of course, we try to keep up with everything that you're doing and everything our competitors are doing and everything that everybody's industries are doing. This is a tough problem. But we're all in this together. Microsoft, customers, ISVs, and our partners, all of you. This global community of integrators is how we can succeed, by leveraging one another's experience and figuring this out. This is a quote I really like from the American comedian Tina Fey. She says this very succinctly as, I learned a long time ago that it was easier to commit to something and work out how you're going to do it afterwards. Because if you never commit, it's actually very difficult to get anything done. It's very difficult to get change. You need to get consensus, you need to get everyone to buy in to do something to make that change. Because if you don't do that, you just kind of drift, right? So say yes and you figure it out afterwards. Why? Well, because if you say no, and you're like in the IT department or wherever you sit in the organization, it's like, why would anyone ever ask you again, right? It's like if you go to use some service or go to a store and buy something and they just say no, are you going to go back? No, you're going to go somewhere else. Inside your organization, things are really no different to this. So just go someplace else. And you'll be disrupted into action anyway. So you don't have a choice. Things are going to change whether you like it or not. So say yes, it's the right thing to do, and figure it out afterwards. It's true, right? I mean, change is great. And it's, the reality of where we live today and what we do. But it's going to be really annoying at some point of time, right? Either other people in your organization or other organizations in your industry are going to disrupt you. And it's going to be annoying. You also have this human nature problem that change just takes time. Whether it's cultural change or organizational change or technology change, it's hard. I've talked to, in the organizations I've worked in, prior to Microsoft, I talked a lot about this in one particular company, that you can try really hard to get things done. You can grow great teams of people to do things, but you cannot remove this from the equation, that change takes time. As soon as you feel like you're fighting human nature, and human nature is to resist change, it's an uphill battle, right? It just takes time. Because there are differences, between the real world and the online world. One way I kind of look at this is that it's very similar to this old adage that, in theory and practice, practice and theory are the same thing, in practice they aren't. When you look at the way disruption happens today, it's very different to the way disruption happened 20 years ago. If you look at, like, in the physical world, you're walking around and maybe you bump into somebody and you immediately apologize. In fact, here in the UK, because everybody apologizes, right? You bump into one of those, oh, I'm really sorry. Because there's that personal connection, right? But as soon as you kind of get on the freeway or whatever you're driving around and somebody cuts you up, so you've got this steel box around you, you feel this isolation from that physical world. So maybe the other guy apologizes, maybe they don't. When you're online, nobody apologizes. Did Uber apologize to the taxi industry for moving their cheese, right? No. Because there's this disconnection that technology creates that empowers you to do things without asking for permission, without asking whether the other guy likes it or not. You do it anyway. It's a big difference. The other guy doesn't care if you like change or not. He's going to make things change, and you're going to have to deal with it. So what if you don't like change, which is, most people, right? If you don't like change, you need to do more of it. Honestly. It's like you need to get out of your comfort zone and do things you don't like to do and change things that are hard to change. How do you know when to change? Well, if you don't see things changing, then experiment and change something. Change them more. I think the advent of DevOps and how that's grown and how that's matured in terms of the application, the execution of what people do, is a great indicator of how you can improve. It wasn't so many years ago when organizations would typically deploy new applications every month or every 3 months or even every year, right, in terms of large application deployments. Very high risk, very high effort. The functionality typically gets squeezed to hit the deadlines, right, that you're committing to the business. So you need to change the model. You need to do it more. You need to look at organizations who have innovated in this space, who deploy every minute or every couple of minutes or every second, right? There is no reason why that's something you can't do. And it turns out that if you do move to that model, the risks go down significantly because the amount of change you're introducing at a time is much less. And that's as true for organizations as it is for IT systems, honestly. Change little and often. Because you can always change it back, right? If you screw up, then, maybe you can change it back even before anybody notices, right? If you're really quick. This is a great quote. This was, Henry Ford. It's like, if I'd asked my customers what they'd wanted, they'd have asked for a faster horse, right? He actually didn't say this. Who knows this quote? It's like even his grandson, it's such a powerful quote, even his grandson thought he said this. Back in the 50s, it's like, he never said it, but it's a great quote. Because it's like, how do you know what you need to change, right? Because like, you always hear all the time, and we hear it all the time ourselves, is like, ask the customers, look out of the window, see what's going on, right? But if you ask your customers, they don't know necessarily what they want. They're not as plugged into the industry as you are. It goes back to this human nature problem. You need to gain experience as quickly and as broadly as possible to understand what's going on inside your own organizations and your own constraints, what's happening on technology in that space and how you can apply that to your industry, and what your competitors are doing so you can start to predict the future, so you can start to see trends emerging in spaces that may not look directly relevant to what you're doing, and figure it out for your customers.
4 stars, best sausages in town.
Nice. Does it say anything about parking? We're just spinning. Mr. Greenlight.
What? She looks like your man.
She does. She's got her eyes. Here we are. Now that's how you park in this town. Table for 2, please. 2 winners.
Drivers win at Confused.com. #1 for car savings.
So it's my very great pleasure to introduce Matthew Fatunka. He's the head of development for car buying at Confused.com. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks,
cheers.
So I've been lucky enough to work at Confused.com for the last 10 years. In that time, I've worked pretty much in every part of the business. I've been part of the partner integration team, working with kind of insurance partners. I've been working with our international cousins, producing similar sites all across the world. And more recently, I've been looking at new products and new ways that we can expand into new markets. Confused.com is a technology company. It may seem like we're a marketing company, but actually, at the heart, we're a technology company. To tell a little bit about that story is to take you back 18 years, back to the year 2000, and to think about what the process of like was getting car insurance back in the year 2000. So you would typically get a recommendation from a friend or family, and you would buy the policy, and then a year later, the renewal would come through and it would be slightly increased. And you would pay for it, because the process of going through and looking at 100, 150 different insurance providers to get a cheaper quote was just not worth the hassle. So back then, Admiral Insurance was a relatively newcomer to that market. And they were looking to, how do we break into this market when no one changes? So they looked for technology solutions. And they looked to say, how can we give people the option to compare? And how can we then make it easy for them to switch to us? So a separate company was spun off from Admiral. And in 2002, we became the first UK car insurance price comparison site. Now, in the early days, those integrations, the way that we worked with partners was crude. We're talking VB5, VB6, 30, 40 servers that were literally filling in forms on insurance websites and then scraping the prices from the screen out of the markup. Sounds crude, but the result was industry changing. Now, the majority of the traffic to most of the insurance companies comes from the big 4 price comparison sites. You may have heard of some of the others. So the price comparison business is a highly competitive one. As you can see from the amount of time that is spent on advertising, the amount of time and money that's spent on advertising, we're constantly on the lookout for an edge, something that will make us stand out from the competition. This could be new products, could be new advertising campaigns, hopefully, or approaches to technology. Now, 5 years ago, Confused began a journey to move our existing infrastructure into Azure. We'd already spent some time in the year before moving to a service-oriented architecture based on .NET and the Microsoft stack. But everything was on fixed hardware, which meant that we were priced up according to our peak capacity, which was typically during Coronation Street on a Monday night when an advert went out. the cloud offered us an opportunity to make significant cost savings. In fact, we estimated it's something like a sevenfold decrease in our costs. Whilst at the same time, it gave us new tools to play with. So as part of this migration, we moved away from these 30, 40 servers onto BizTalk. Now, to give you some indication as to what it was like before, when I first joined the company, we were using a SQL database as a kind of orchestrator. We had the front ends writing requests into tables. We'd have some primitive load balancing technology that would then farm those requests out to 100, 150 partners. And then those results would then be written back to the database, which the front ends would then be polling for. That's a locking nightmare. Particularly when you factor in the fact that we're talking about thousands of requests an hour, 100, 150 HTTP requests out to partners with every single one of those. You're looking at 2 billion requests going out to partners every year. With BizTalk hosted in Azure, we were able to replace those back-end servers and to standardize on the way we did our transformations and communication with partners. What that meant was that our developers were now freed up to work on new integrations with new partners, to increase our panel size, and to look at new products. The ability to define in Azure our infrastructure as code meant that we could actually now react to demand even on BizTalk. So we could scale up and we could add new nodes to our cluster in anticipation of demand. It still leaves us a bit of a problem with managing load. So we were a very early adopter of Azure Service Bus. The front ends are talking to BizTalk via Service Bus queues. That way we get to kind of smooth out that load. And we don't introduce that much latency at peak times. And then to get prices back, we're using Service Bus topics. And the front ends are subscribing to these topics and literally having their messages pushed back from BizTalk all the way back up to the front end. No more polling. So this is my baby. Having transformed the car insurance industry 3 years ago, we started to look at new markets. And Confused have always had this kind of drive to be on the driver's side or driver's win or whatever the marketing message is this week. But we were looking at it in terms of what's a pain point along the process. And actually, the process of buying a car right now is pretty horrible. No one wants to go into a dealer. By the time most people get into a dealer, they've already established the car that they want to buy. They want to sign, maybe take it for a test drive, done. No one wants to be pressured into buying unnecessary finance products. The test drive, whilst useful, is awkward because, as everyone knows, it is another sales opportunity. It's that moment for 10 minutes when the dealer has you exclusively at their attention. So, Confused set up a team. And over the last 3 years, my team and I have been working to make this a reality. We were given a bit of a remit to experiment, to find new and interesting ways to solve problems, and to feed that learnings back to the core business. For Confused, this would be the first time we would create a brand new product that was unshackled from the legacy. It would be totally cloud native. So what do I mean by cloud native? Well, the site is built from off-the-shelf products available in Azure. You can see a selection of them here. Some of them have been tested in production and then thrown away because they weren't meeting the purpose. Now, the integration challenges on a project like car buying are very different from car insurance. Our challenges are mostly centered around this idea of how do we get stock to sell. Every day, we receive updates on 10,000 vehicles from a dozen dealer groups. In principle, this is an easy problem to solve. We get a file in, we write it to the database, we can sell, everyone's a winner. But as I'm sure we all know in this room, problems like that are never that simple. Right now, the file comes in, The data has to be cleaned. We have to apply pricing rules. We have to submit requests off to CRM systems. We have to notify parties that new feeds have come in, new data has come in. Now, we could have extended our existing BizTalk cluster for this. Or we could have used SSIS packages. But for what was actually, in comparison to car insurance, a relatively small job, adding more nodes to the BizTalk cluster would probably have been cost prohibitive. And it went against this remit of we should be trying new things, we should be experimenting. As a team of developers, we were skeptical, to say the least, of logic apps. Cries of, why wouldn't I write this in C# were uttered in the office. But we persevered. We put together the workflow using the visual designer. Snapping actions together was easy, and the range of actions available was more than enough. The product owner could get involved and understand the process, because it wasn't that far removed from the original flow diagram they'd given us in the first place. What's more is the template was active, which meant we could test changes to the process really quickly. The most rewarding moment during the development phase was seeing a group of cynical devs around a single screen asking questions like, can we run those actions in parallel? And then a quick drag, trying it, moments later we can see the results. After the first couple of templates had been produced, the cries had changed to, why would I write this in C#? So with the product owners and dev team now sold on the idea, all we needed to do was to sell it to the people signing the checks and the people monitoring production. Selling to the bill payers is easy. Using the online tools, we'd estimated that to process about 10,000 vehicles a day, vehicle updates a day, it would cost us about £30 a month. By the time we'd finished tweaking that process, that figure had roughly halved. And we suspect there's probably more savings to be had in there as well. When the ops team started playing, they were amazed by the amount of diagnostic information they could get from the Azure portal. The visual nature of the designer meant that it's always clear when any issues occurred, and individual runs can be resubmitted with a single click. So what's on our radar for the second half of this year? As with most businesses, there's an interest in the data that we produce. We're looking to make a lot of that data available via APIs. But the nature of those APIs is that they probably won't be heavy use. There'll be occasional use. And thanks to Logic Apps now, we're quite smitten with this idea of the pay-for-what-you-use model. So we're now looking at Azure Functions as an alternative for this, as a way of porting across some of our existing code that we have in some of our APIs. And we don't have to spin up VMs to make that happen. Now, once we've got this collection of APIs, we're going to want a consistent way of managing the users. And we're going to want a consistent way of billing and throttling and all those kind of wonderful things that we could build ourselves. But frankly, API management has it all covered for us. So to give you a quick recap, Confused is at heart a technology company. There's some debate within the company as to whether we're a marketing company or a technology company. Without the technology, none of the business would exist. We've used as much of Azure as we can get our hands on, and we'll continue to do that. And to echo what John said, the importance of experimentation, to use a quote from Jimmy Carr, cats have 9 lives, makes them ideal for experimentation. If you need any more information about what I've spoken about today, please come and find me. And enjoy the rest of your conference.
Awesome stuff, right? This is incredible. This is the application of technology and the changing of business and the disruption of an industry all wrapped up into one, which of course is even better using Microsoft technology. You know, let's move on. I think one of the things that I think is fascinating about integration and the way integration is changing and where it's going is this network effect that occurs. For those of you who aren't familiar with kind of network effects and how they work, this is a term coined in the 70s as the first telephone networks kind of really started to grow. The problem of having a network that's relatively small is like there's relatively small value in it, right? The guy who buys the first telephone is taking a bit of a punt on this technology being successful, right? And even when he does that and the second person comes along, he'd really kind of like to know who the second person is, otherwise he's probably not going to want to talk to them anyway. It's kind of wasting his money. So what happens is that over time the network grows and the amount of value that gets added as each node, telephone, whatever, application system in this case, gets added, the value grows exponentially relative to the cost growing linearly in conjunction with that. So as you start to connect different systems together, and Logic Apps and our cloud platform make this super easy to do this. So you don't just solve those traditional problems of how do I move data around between my different parts of my organization and maybe my partners, and how do I do things like invoicing and all these other very common processing patterns. No, you move on from that and you start to be able to apply other services to those processes and start to get insights into that data, start to understand what's going on from an organizational level, start doing things like fraud detection or anomaly checking to see whether things are out of pattern and react and respond to that in real time. You can start to apply machine learning and AI to this to get genuine insights into your organization, to understand it better so that you can create more integration, to drive more insights, to drive more change and more disruption in your industry. So, what I want to introduce now is a company that we created called Contoso Retail. So Contoso Retail are an outfitter for every occasion. Contoso Retail are a traditional bricks and mortar company who are being disrupted by the online world. They always prided themselves in customer service, which to them always means they want to provide the best experience possible, both in-store and online. And of course, that means they never want to lose a sale. They never want a customer to leave empty-handed and unhappy and dissatisfied, because they'll just go someplace else because they didn't say yes, right? So let's have a look at what they did. They took their traditional processing and looked at how they could augment that with the cloud, how they could introduce new technology to change their business. So the first thing that they did was they looked at the inventory checking and back ordering process and introduced Power Apps in store so that a sales assistant could interact with a customer so that when somebody comes along and says that they can't find what they're looking for, they can drive that through putting up APIs in front of their back-end systems, SAP in this case, to do inventory checking and order management and sales order creation so that they can automate these processes.
My name is Derek. I am your personal shopper here at Contoso Retail. Contoso Retail have equipped me, a personal shopper, with this awesome Power App in which I can not only use to check inventory for my customer, but even place a back order if they are looking for something that we don't have in stock. It looks like we have just the customer that I can help with. Hello, sir.
Hello. I was browsing your store and I love this T-shirt, but it's maybe a size or too small for me. So, have you got any other larger ones in
Well,
stock?
sure. Let me check that for you really quick. So all I need to do is to point my camera at this barcode. It should be recognized
I think the
instantly.
barcode's bigger than the T-shirt.
We went to extensive lengths to make this as realistic as possible.
So a call is being made to our backend system. It should take a few seconds for us to retrieve the result. Let's see. But sir, it looks like we have a few small, medium, and large ones available. But I think you are looking for something different.
I'm looking for humongous.
All right. So we do have a humongous size in our inventory system, but unfortunately we don't have that in the store. But do not worry. If you like, we can actually place a back order for you. It should arrive in store within 3 to 5 business days. You will even get the email when that arrives, so you can come and pick it up.
That sounds fine.
So let's start with the back order process, where they have the item ID and the size and quantity already populated. So all I need from you is the customer ID, if you remember that.
Yeah, it's 007.
All right. Customer 007.
I do think an awful lot of myself. Yes.
Sure thing. So it looks like we already have all the information that we need, your address, your credit card, and your CVV number on file. So with your permission, I can just go ahead and place the order for you.
That sounds great. Thank you very much.
All right, so we'll take another few seconds. We'll make a few calls to our backend just to make sure the credit card is still valid, and then we'll create a sales order in our ordering system. And then you can be on your way and come and pick it up once that is ready. All right, there you go. So the order is received, and you will get an email, and you can come and pick
Thank
up
you very much.
once you have that. So now we have showed you the customer's experience in checking inventory and placing back order. I want to show you what happened behind the scene. So in this implementation, we have two logic apps. The first in which calls into Cosmos DB, in which we use for inventory management. But the second one is actually the interesting piece and the one that I want to show you. So I'm going to switch into the Azure portal. The second logic app we call it back order item is a logic app that runs in integration service environment. With its VNet connectivity, we first, let me refresh the page. We first make a call into BizTalk server and check to make sure the customer's credit card information is still valid and contains sufficient funds that we need to complete the purchase. The BizTalk will return a Boolean value telling us whether that is indeed the case, and we will proceed if that is evaluated true. If the customer's credit card is good, we will again, using VNet connectivity provided to us with integration service environments, making a call into SAP server. Again, it's on-prem installation that will connect to without the need of on-premise data gateway. So we'll create a sales order in SAP, which will then be picked up in a later demo and send it to our suppliers. So let's recap really quick. What we have done here, we have two logic apps in which we use to integrate with cloud and on-prem systems. Here we use Cosmos DB for inventory that lives on the cloud. We have BizTalk server for payment processing, and we have SAP for our ERP system, all connect to from logic app through VNet. So Logic App make this integration very easy. Both Logic App use request and response pattern to expose itself as an API, which is then secured and monitored by API management. The API management endpoint is then exposed to Power Apps, and with its rich set of built-in controls, just like barcode scanner that you've seen, make it really quick for us to do rapid application development and make it possible for personal shopper like me to better help with our customers. So now the sales order is in SAP. Let's see what happened next.
Okay, let's do that. Thanks, Derek, and thanks, Matt, as well. Okay, let's look at the second part of this process. Here, like once we've collected this data, the customers looks like they've got what they need. It's in the warehouse. We need to create an order that we can send from SAP to the supplier. So that's going to be done through a Logic app using our new SAP trigger to actually take changes that happen in SAP and actually then invoke a Logic app and make that happen. Divya, why don't you show us that?
All right, thank you, John. All right, so I want to start with the SAP system. As a next step, what we are going to do is we have created a purchase order in response to the sales order that we received from the customer. So as a next step, I want to send this purchase order to my supplier, and I'm going to hit this button here, and let's close this window. So we want to process the purchase order created here before we send it to the supplier, and we want to do all the processing in the Logic apps. Today, if you want to do this today, this is not possible, right? Like you cannot receive a message from SAP into Logic apps. This is changing from today. I'm very excited to announce the private preview of SAP Trigger that would allow you to receive messages from the SAP system into the Logic apps. So let's look at the run that, all right. Before we look into the Logic app, I do want to mention that this is a big milestone for us when it comes to integration between Logic apps and SAP, because now we have bidirectional connectivity between Logic apps and SAP. We already had it from Logic apps to SAP, but with Trigger, it completes our story with bidirectional connectivity. Another thing that I want to mention that the trigger, SAP trigger that we have added is not a polling-based trigger, which means that you do not have to poll all the time to check whether a message has been, whether an event has been generated in SAP system. This trigger is based on webhook, which means that whenever an event is generated from SAP, the trigger gets it via a callback that has been registered at the gateway. So let's look at the logic app. In the logic app, I have the trigger where I have received the XML message from my SAP system. As a next step, I want to do some B2B processing on the message. So I'm transforming the message that I received from SAP into an EDI purchase order document here. Next, I'm encoding the document using the X12 agreement between the Contoso Retail and Fabricam, which is our supplier. And finally, I'm sending the message to the supplier over their SFTP server. If this connector looks new to you, well, this is another thing that is coming pretty soon, where the current SFTP connector has a message limitation of processing up to 50 MB. The new SFTP connector is going to process at least 1 GB when it is introduced, probably more. So with that, let's quickly recap on what we saw today. We basically received a message from SAP into Logic Apps via the new SAP trigger that we are announcing today. And then we did some B2B and XML processing on the message using artifacts from integration account, which is our secure container for artifacts. And then finally, we sent the message to the supplier using the newly introduced, again, SFTP connector, which would support large message sizes up to 1 GB and more. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thanks, Divya. Awesome. So let's move on. We're halfway through. So we had the ability for a customer, Matt, to be able to come to a store, interact with a sales agent, a personal shopper, because everybody has personal shoppers in the States, right? And could find what he wanted and then order that through SAP to the supplier. So let's look at the process now of actually handling the delivery, the supplier telling us when they're going to ship that item to the store so that we can let the customer know that it's there and ready to arrive by sending him an email. Let's have a look at that.
Okay, so yes, we're going to look at the process. Once the order has been fulfilled by the logistics company, they're going to tell us that the order's there and we're going to process it. So let's see if I can use my Mac skills here. There we go. Right. So the first thing I'm going to show you is if we head into our Service Bus instance. So something that was announced at Build this year is a much easier way to integrate with Azure Event Grid. And we see in the Events tab here on this Service Bus instance, we can easily set up a new Event Grid subscription. If we go to the Get Started tab, you can see it's very easy for us to create a brand new event sync that we then use to process the Event Hub trigger when it runs. You don't have to go and set this up yourself. You just click on the button and provision a new logic app function, or you can set it up as a webhook if you'd like. So let's see that working in for real. Now, the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use my API management service. Now, like all good modern companies, Contoso does a lot of their partner interaction by provisioning HTTP APIs at the edge so their partners can call them, tell us what's going on, and manage business processes. So we would obviously use the partners application, but we're going to cheat a little bit today by just going in and running the API management test console to create the item arriving. So I'm going to hit send now and send in my customer order. So that will carry on and run, and we'll go and have a look here at the logic app that's processed. So what's happening is the API management service API is popping a message onto the Service Bus queue. When the Service Bus message arrives, Event Grid is waiting for messages to appear. It will then trigger and alert the logic app to say something's happened. And I'm hoping in the run history we're going to see that it ran. But here's one I prepared earlier, just to get around the little demo. I suspect what will happen is this will run and it will trigger an email, and I'll feel it pop in my pocket in a second. But what happens is the event grid trigger runs. Now, this is all set up for you automatically when you use the events tab that I just showed you. So this is actually what happens when the event grid trigger runs, passes in the body message. Then we use the peak lock method for service bus to go and have a look and see what messages are on the queue. Now, it could be one or more messages, so what we need to do then is run a for each loop round those messages on the queue. Run those messages. There we go. Max skills. Check those messages on the queue, process each one of them, parse the JSON out of those messages, and then complete the message. And what we do is send an email. And that's the sort of email I received. So that's the event grid trigger running in Logic Apps. Let's go back and show you exactly what we did. So we used API management as our public interface for partners to tell us about business processes that are going on. The logistics partner told us that the item order had arrived. It then creates a message on a service bus queue for us to consume. And because there's an event grid trigger set up on that service bus queue, it runs, and Logic Apps consumes it. We go through all the messages in that queue and then perform an action. In this case, it was setting an email, sending to the customer, but it could be performing lots of other actions. John.
Great. Thank you very much, Matt. All right. So just one more step to go. So how do we handle the pickup? How do we deal with that? How do we deal with the customer coming in store and kind of presenting themselves rather than having to go through the process of finding somebody and digging out their order number and all the rest of it? What we're going to show here is using Azure Functions running on a Raspberry Pi, which is a device right here on the table, which is running a machine learning model, which is running facial recognition, so that the customer can just walk straight up to the kiosk where this is installed, be immediately recognized, trigger a Logic app to complete the back-end processing, which is actually going to go to BizTalk server on premises to do the bank interaction with the credit card company to do the completion of the payment from the details that were collected earlier, you know, that credit card check to make sure everything was valid. Now we're going to execute on that and back to the back end using BizTalk on premises to complete the process, get the payment, and let the customer leave a happy bunny.
All right, this is really cool stuff. So what I have here is a Raspberry Pi, but it's not any Raspberry Pi. It has Azure Function running right on top of it. And within Azure Function, we're running machine learning algorithm to do facial recognition. With Contoso Retail, every customer, when they sign up, just like 007 here, we actually take pictures. And with the help of those pictures, we can train the model so that later on, when they walk into the store, their face can be instantly recognized. And we know that that's the customer that's here to pick up the back order item. So what you see here, I have an array of LEDs. And the moment it recognizes a face that it knows, it will turn green and show a green check mark. So let's try that out really quick. So I'm just going to point that towards Matt. There you go. So there's a green check mark if I orient it this way. Once the face is recognized, we will drop a message into Service Bus via Logic App, which will then be transferred into BizTalk, which is our payment system, if you remember from the earlier demo, and that will finalize the payment, and the customer can go on their way. And here we have a T-shirt for you.
I like my humongous T-shirt. There we go.
All right. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Paul, who will be showing you the BizTalk portion of the demo.
Hey, everyone. So let's see. Back in the 80s, I was using real PCs, the first Apples, including Macintosh, and then IBM systems. So hopefully I won't have a problem with this Mac. I'm here to prove that you can, this is real again, kind of like Divya as part of the demo, and also that you can reuse your existing infrastructure. So Contoso has invested in BizTalk Server for integration on-premises infrastructure, as well as their financial applications that run on IBM mainframe in this case. We're going to reuse those. So BizTalk Server is going to receive from Service Bus using the BizTalk adapter for Service Bus on the receive port. And then it's going to process that message into a message that can be understood by the BizTalk adapter for DB2. We're going to call a store procedure, because again, we're doing two things. In this case, we're going to go ahead and process the order. But earlier, we were doing two things. We were checking the balance of the credit card, checking the credit card, checking to make sure the credit card number and CVV and all that stuff was accurate, expiration, and then putting a authorization hold. In this case, we're going to process authorization hold to a completed. then lastly, BizTalk server is going to send, again, using the BizTalk adapter for Service Bus, the message back to Service Bus for the logic app to receive that and complete the whole end of the process order on the Azure side. So real quick, just to prove this all worked, got the mainframe, it's logged me out since I was last in there. Okay, so the point of this is also to get that message of change. You don't want to be using these backend systems forever, okay? You want to change. You want to use, there we go, it's case sensitive. You want to use modern on-prem and integration platform as a service to get away from these systems as much as possible. In fact, we have some of our Microsoft field people here that if you are looking to migrate off of these SAP and IBM systems, we'd love to have a conversation with you. Oops. And this is about as graphical as it can get in our mainframe system. Multiple colors.
That's something I just think is great about running this on an Apple Mac. I just think it's the colliding of worlds.
All right, so I'm just going to run a real quick query to make sure that that order had been processed, and it should be in a completed state. So let's take a look here. Ta-da! That was done earlier today, this morning, and it is in a completed state, and it is for the customer. Let's go to the right. Scrolling around here is so much fun. 007. Well, trust me, it's for that customer. Great. It's so much fun. I love that world, especially on a podium with a Macintosh. Thanks, Derek. Right, so just to recap, we use Internet of Things with intelligent devices on the edge and machine learning. And then with that, all that was running in the context of a serverless compute model with Azure Functions. We've wrapped and protected and published our APIs with API management. The actual application in the cloud is a logic app workflow, and that then is connecting through a VPN connection to BizTalk server on-prem. Turns out it's also running an Azure data center in the US. And then that's communicating across the wide area network to our mainframe in Redmond, business class Z12. And you're able to reuse your existing infrastructure while taking advantage of the latest and greatest technologies in cloud, machine learning, really cool stuff.
Good stuff. Thank you very much, Paul. Okay, so let's just do a quick recap of what you saw. One of the first things that you actually didn't see, and you will see later, is that the logic apps that we're running in the first couple of demos are using our new integration service environment. This is a new capability which is in private preview, so if you're interested, come and talk to us. That gives you the option of creating your own private, dedicated, isolated set of compute in Azure that you can deploy logic apps into to be able to give you VNet connectivity to on-premises without using the data gateway, providing isolated storage and other sort of actions to that to give you predictability in the performance and for a fixed price per month. The second thing you saw was a new SAP trigger, the ability to just trigger directly from SAP without having to mess around with doing gymnastics that you've had to do in the past, and make that super easy. We will go into that in a lot more detail this afternoon. The next thing you saw was a quick glimpse at our new SFTP connector. So this is going to be released alongside the existing one, and we'll sort of phase it over time. But we heard consistently over the last year or two that you really needed better support for large file processing. This will bring you that. Initially a gigabyte, but there's no reason why we can't go much higher than that. So we encourage you, when this is released, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, to try this out and give us your feedback and tell us the cool things that you're building with this. The next thing you saw was the event grid trigger for Service Bus. This is a big deal because Service Buses are one of our most used connectors and most used services with logic apps. People are implementing ESB type patterns and other sort of pub sub type things. And the ability to actually trigger off of new messages arriving in queues and topics with subscriptions was a big deal because you're constantly having to poll previously to using event grid for this. And now you just get fired immediately, notified that there are new messages to process and pick them up without having to sort of hammer the Service Bus endpoint all the time using the connector just because you were waiting for this message and wanted to process it as quickly as possible. The next thing you saw, which is obviously super cool, is the ability to run functions on the edge, the ability to run functions anywhere, on a Raspberry Pi, running a whole bunch of cool stuff, whether it's machine learning or other function code, being able to then, inside of that, do facial recognition. And the final thing, I want to call out is just the seamless integration between all of this, not the Wi-Fi network notwithstanding, the ability to put all of this together and build an end-to-end holistic solution. I give thanks to Matt and Divya and Paul and Derek for putting this together in very short timescales. This is not a lot of work to kind of create these things, and it's just speaks to the power of our integration platform. Okay, so let's sort of start to wrap this up. As I said earlier, we're all in this together. So this is the opportunity, 400 of you, to introduce yourselves with your peers here and get to meet other people. Please come and talk to us. The types of challenges you're experiencing, the success stories that you've had. It's great to see Matt Fultanka talking about Confused, a real, born in the cloud, native, disrupting innovation in a very established industry like insurance. This is our sort of products in action, if you like. So, please have fun. This is your event. This is your community. Dig in and dive in and talk to people. As I said earlier, we have more people here than I think we've ever had before. There's like over 21 people here. So here's all the sort of faces and names behind everybody. I'll just leave this up there for a couple of minutes so you can memorize it. All the teams that we have, from Logic Apps to Functions to API Management, Service Bus, Event Grid, et cetera, we are all here from the integration teams back in Redmond. So, please talk to us. Okay, I'll leave you with this. I think this is a great quote from Satya recently. Every company is a software company. Matt said this from Confused. It's true, right? If you're not a software company, if your company is not built around the innovation and the technology that you're using, it soon will be. Or somebody else will do it and disrupt you and make you a follower rather than a leader. It's really you thinking about your own future as a digital company. So as we approach the end of this decade, which is kind of scary in itself when we head towards the 2020s, what are you going to change to create the future? Let me leave you with that, and thank you very much, and I hope you have a great conference. Thanks.